Now, we talked about the 4-second video that Ariana snapped of the seizure before she came and woke me up. So that was key. So the ER doctor, well, before they paged pediatric neurology, the ER doctor came in and I said, I have this video. And she asked to see it, which I was actually surprised. I didn't think they would care, I guess. Like, I don't know why. I just didn't think that would be useful for them.
Why though?
I don't know. It's like home shot footage. Like it's not clinical, right? So like in my mind, I'm thinking like red tape. You have to remember, like working in healthcare the way that I did, there was so much red tape.
Mm-hmm.
So when I wasn't necessarily surprised she asked to see it. I was surprised that she took a video on her own phone to put it in the chart. Mm-hmm. That's what I was surprised by. But a lot has changed in healthcare since I was there. But anyway, so she found it to be extremely useful. And the reason for that is because, I just touched on this very briefly, but the part that our older daughter snapped was a focal onset, meaning just one side of her body. So if you're sensitive to seizure content, skip forward about 10 seconds. But her eyes were kind of rolling back and fixed to her left. Her left arm was repetitively jerking. And what else? Am I missing something? I see this video in my head over and over again. What am I missing?
You said she was sweating really bad, right?
Yeah, but like movement wise. Mouth, I think, was doing something. Mm-hmm. And so they were able to say that it started as a focal seizure. Now we know it generalized because when I walked in, by that point it was a tonic-clonic, and it affected her breathing and her heart rate and everything. So it was super useful information. And honestly, I think it's the biggest reason why we walked away from that emergency room with a diagnosis, because a lot of families aren't that fortunate. They have to fight for one.
Well, I want to stop you right there too, because if y'all remember from the episode past, like we have our daughter on a Bark phone. That's what we use, or one of those phones that's essentially just locked down. Just trying to imagine what would have happened had we locked down the camera and video footage, you know. That could have changed everything.
Yeah, but
have you thought about that?
No, I haven't thought about it, but I wouldn't have ever locked down the camera. I just wouldn't have, because it has monitoring for that specifically.
I guess so. That's where I'm like grateful, you know, that she was still able to do that and get the diagnosis that we did, because it would have taken a lot longer.
Maybe, although I think the diagnosis, I think we still would have gotten the diagnosis because EMT saw it, but they wouldn't have known the specific diagnosis until later. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I think we still would have gotten diagnosis because there were medical professionals that witnessed it besides just the parents. So pediatric neurology came in. She was a resident, super, super sweet. Sat down with me for about like 30 minutes or so. You would have been still driving, so you were not there for that conversation. Don't remember a whole lot about it other than that she talked about how she had reviewed Mila's NICU MRIs, which, to clarify, she was not in the NICU at Children's Hospital. She was in the NICU somewhere else, but she had been seen by a pediatric neurologist from Children's Hospital. So all of her records, thank goodness, were already in their system from the NICU, mostly like her MRI and stuff. So she sat down and she looked at it and explained to me that most of the injury to her brain from birth, which was really mild in and of itself, like staring at your mic.
I was just making sure it was where it's supposed to be, sorry.
You're good. So most of the injury of her brain was on the right side. And like I said, the movements that were happening at the very beginning were on the left, which is how it works. So if you have an injury to the right, it affects the left. And if you have an injury to the left, it affects the right, for the most part. I'm not a neurologist. That's just how they explained it to me. I'm obviously not a neurologist, or otherwise we would be doing a lot better with, our life, right? Anyway, so because of the video and because they could see that it was left-sided movement, she got a diagnosis of epilepsy very fast because it was a structural seizure. So she got a diagnosis of epilepsy. Without the video, I still think she would have probably gotten a diagnosis, maybe, or she would have gotten a diagnosis of seizures, and then we would have had to go to the neurologist, and I don't know, but she got one, and the diagnosis was focal epilepsy with generalized features, which is still her diagnosis. We've seen a lot of providers, and we've really vetted that, and we'll get into that in some future episodes, but that is her diagnosis. So what that means, just really quick, if you care, if you don't, skip forward a couple seconds, but her seizures start on one side of her brain, and they very quickly cross the center and affect her whole brain. I did get emotional at that point because That's like a permanent thing, you know?
Yep.
And having that friend with it, we knew how bad it could be. So at that point, it was scary, really scary, because our friend with epilepsy, like treatment resistant, any seizure at any point could take her life. She's had CPR multiple times. VNS device like really doesn't do much, like it really, really bad. So we've seen like basically the worst case of epilepsy
Yep.
in a friend. So when they gave us that diagnosis, it felt so heavy, you know?
Yep.
Because not only had I just watched her nearly go into cardiac arrest, but now we're getting this. It's a heavy diagnosis regardless, you know? But our only experience with it, having been that was tough. That was like really, really, really hard to hear.
Yep.
And it marks you for life, you know?